Hi, Neil.
Shalom, Cheli.
You have reached chapter 19 in the podcast Upskill Yourself. We have a special guest today, Jessica Gerard, who's not entirely fluent in Hebrew, so we're going to be doing this podcast in English. Jessica, for the past 15 years, has directed academic programs and taught professional communication at Columbia, Stanford, and other universities. She's the founder of Gerard Consulting in Silicon Valley, where she coaches professionals who are new to the US, and she specializes in English language and culture training in the workplace, as well as special programs for women and families for relocated employees. So today we're going to talk about what is culture, the critical differences between Israeli and American culture, and the 4 dimensions of cultural differences. יאללה, התחלנו. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
So good to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here.
Very exciting.
Yes.
So the first question I have for you is, we want you to tell us, how did you become an expert in Israeli-American culture differences?
Yes. Well, I would love to consider myself an expert, but I will definitely
You
talk
are.
to you about how I came to this. So first of all, my background is I have a doctorate in intercultural communication and linguistics, but Israel in particular, this is something that's very close to my heart. First of all, my mother lived in Israel for 10 years. She was born in Poland in 1948, part of what was left of a Jewish family. And they moved to Israel, 1948, which I can't even imagine what that was like to be there at that time. And after 10 years, moved to the United States. So I've always been learning about, Israel and Hebrew, and always felt this deep connection.
But you were born and raised in
born and raised, New Jersey, New York, New Jersey. I'm an American. And my mother, interestingly enough, quickly became an American as well. She came, child of refugees, when she was 9 years old, and now she's as American as you can be. The second reason I'm very interested, and there are 3, by the way, I'll tell you the second. I married an Israeli, which was my plan since the time I went to Israel. The first time I was 16, and I saw the Israeli guys, and I said, this is for me. This is great. And, as you can imagine, so now I have a big Israeli family that I'm a part of, and there are a lot of cultural differences. And it's very interesting, because I'd like to say quickly, a lot of times when you're Jewish in America, you think that Israelis they're just like you, right? They're Jewish. I mean, my husband and I, our families, 3 generations back, came from basically the same town or area in Poland. Okay. 3 generations back, we were the same people with the same culture and the same way of communicating. And now, he lived in Israel. He's Israeli. I grew up in America. We can barely have a conversation sometimes without a cultural difference getting into the way. So it's very important. And then finally, I just want to say I do a lot of work with Israelis. I'm in Silicon Valley. There's a part of Silicon Valley we call the kibbutz, because there's so many Israelis here. And, I see the things they're going through. I see what it's like to come here with an Israeli way of being and, integrate into an American workplace.
So it's a personal thing.
It's very personal. I want to help them.
I have a question. It's a bit challenging, but let's go straight ahead to the deep water. How would you define culture?
Yeah, that's a very important question. So here's the way I look at it. Culture is a system of rules and policies and beliefs and even stereotypes that allows humans to live together. Because fundamentally, humans are very different. We're very different people. You can be part of one culture, and within that culture, you have 100 different personality types. So culture is here as a system to help us live together. It tells us when to speak, how to speak, who do you speak to? Are you allowed to speak? It's a set of unspoken rules.
And can you say that we can identify 2 layers of the culture? One that is seen and the other one is not seen or hidden?
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. The most popular and I think important metaphor we use to talk about culture is we always talk about an iceberg. I love to show people images of big, beautiful icebergs, because you have the part that's sticking up above the water. And then you have the part below the water, your values, your beliefs. And you don't sometimes even know what your own values and beliefs are. So absolutely, this is a perfect way to talk about culture.
So we have different cultures everywhere. Okay, right? Like you have organizational culture and a city culture and, an international culture.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're going to focus on Israeli American culture and the differences between them.
Yes.
So what is the essence of true intercultural understanding, specifically Israeli American?
Absolutely. So one thing we're gonna discuss today is the fact that there are some pretty big differences between Israelis and Americans. And as a matter of fact, Israelis have the honor of being on some of the most extreme sides of particular cultural behaviors. Like if you look at a spectrum of being direct, for example, dugri, Israelis are the most direct culture ever studied so far in research. So it's very important to understand this. It's very important in the workplace. And here's what I think. The most important thing for true understanding of another culture is a willingness to have a real compassion and understanding for their cultural logic. It is absolutely not about learning a list of here are the top 10 things that Israelis do. So let's say I say to you, Israelis are really direct. Did you know they're one of the most direct cultures in the world? Fair enough, but I need to tell you why that is. And I need to tell you why Israelis value being so direct and why that's a beautiful and admirable thing for them, and share stories with that, with non-Israeli folks, so that they really understand that their reasoning and have like compassion for it and understanding for it. And if you don't have that, you have nothing.
So I want to understand. You said compassion, but I also know the two other definitions: empathy and sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and also identification are like four different determination. What is the right one to use? And I have another question. While Haley, you were talking, I thought about the culture define my identity.
Yes.
So I think it's all around identity and how do I define myself. So if you can just make a bit order in all these terms.
Wow. Okay. So there's so much here. We could talk about your question for 3 hours. But what can
Okay.
I say? What,
We have time.
yeah. What can we say that's useful, especially when we're thinking about managers, management, these issues in the workplace? Look, empathy is an interesting thing because unless you've been in that situation, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to have empathy for it. But let me give you a specific example. This might help. Okay.
Great. Yeah.
Israelis often, I have lots of clients who are Israeli, and they often say to me, can you please help me understand why Americans are always sugarcoating things? Why are they always sugarcoating things? Why are they saying things so gently? Why can't they just say, that idea won't work? Why do they have to say, well, I was thinking that maybe the other idea would work better, or yeah, it's an interesting idea. I like the first part, but it strikes Israelis as very dishonest. So let's start with that right here. You have some Israelis looking at Americans, looking at their managers and saying, can't you just be honest with me? That's frustrating for them and it's demotivating for them. So where does the compassion or empathy come in? Let me give you an example and you tell me how you want to talk about this.
Great. Yeah,
So what I say to them is, this is what I say. I say, here it is from an American point of view. America's a huge country. People move all the time. We're incredibly mobile. We switch job after job after job. You start off in Florida, you end up in California. It is very rare to live near your family at this point, honestly. We don't go to Shabbat. We don't go to Shabbat dinner every weekend. There is a feeling in this country of you have to be like very polite and diplomatic and show that respect with an extra set of words, or you might ruin a relationship. Now let's look at it from the other perspective. If you're an Israeli and you can say to your friend or your coworker or your boss, that idea won't work, and they're okay with it, and they accept the feedback, and life goes on, and you innovate, and you become the startup nation, that's awesome. Now think about us Americans who are kind of trapped here in our diplomacy and in our politeness and in our sugarcoating. And I can share with you how afraid I would feel to actually say to a colleague, that idea won't work. I'm scared. I'm scared my relationship will end. That's why I sugarcoat.
I think you said a few things. One, it's the sugarcoating is a way to show respect.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It literally means I respect you.
Yeah. So it's not dishonest.
Exactly.
It's a way for you to show respect and the way for you to show me that you value the relationship.
Yes.
From what I heard, Jessica, I heard two emotional or two feelings about the American culture. First of all, you spoke about fear.
Yeah.
And fear is really deep and sometimes, so it's a kind of survival feeling or survival emotion.
Yeah.
And the second thing you said is about afraid to become alone, or you spoke about loneliness.
Yeah.
Because if I move so frequently and all the time I have to gain again friends, deep inside, I'm alone. And
Yeah.
that's really explained to me, thank you, Jessica, all this sugar coat. Because if I won't have this sugar coat, I won't survive. It's like
Yeah.
a surviving protection mechanism. And it's beautiful. And now let's go to what you
I
asked
think,
me
but one thing,
before.
I think it's not only moving from place to place, country to country. My kids are now in second grade, and I understood that every year they switch classes.
Yeah. Yes.
They mix up the kids. In Israel, you can be 2 or 3 or more years with the same classmates.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay? In some schools, you'll go through the whole elementary school in with the same class.
Oh my God.
Okay?
Yeah.
Middle school here is like college. You go from class to class. You don't have, how do you call it, the home class?
You don't have a homeroom. You don't have a base class.
You don't have a base class in a very delicate age. Okay,
Wow.
so you become independent very, very
Yes.
quickly. In Israel, you have the same class through middle school, 3 years of middle school, 3
Wow.
years of high school, same class. Okay, so I think it's the relationships
Yes.
are thinner.
Yes. And can I just add also, you have the army.
Yeah, we have that.
You have that experience. And these things. And just another thing I want to add quickly. When we talk about the workplace, one of the most important things we should talk about also is the school system that came before it, because that's where your workers are created. And I can't emphasize enough commentary about how children are raised, how people are raised, what college is like, explains so much about intercultural behavior in the workplace.
I'll add to that. I had a nice, an interesting conversation about it yesterday. I got the aha moment that Israeli kids are like really wild and loud and are allowed to be wild and loud. And then we go to the army, and then they teach us how to be disciplined. And in America,
Yes,
correct me.
I see where you're going.
Kids are really, really taught to be polite and gentle and quiet. And then they go to college, and then all hell breaks loose, you know?
It certainly does. I taught 18-year-olds for about 15 years.
Yeah. So it's like you end up the same because you know how to be polite and you know how to be disciplined, and you know how, you balance it, but it's like the road to get there is different. Yes. And then it shapes your identity, I think, right?
It does.
What I think, sorry, that we're just doing right now, we're doing generalization. And we have to be very careful when we do this generalization, because, it's like we put all the people in the same bubble. And Jessica, you said there's culture, but there are also individuals. So let's hold it. And the second thing is what I wanted to say, and then we go to the example you want to give, Ellie, is about compassion. I don't think that when I meet the American sugar coat, I have to feel compassion towards American, because compassion, in my opinion, is try to help them, to save them. Uh, that's not my job. That's not me. I think I have to feel empathy, which means I understand, like we talked, the mechanism where this American sugar coat come from, and I honor it, I respect it, and I like it, and that's enough.
That's great. That's what we're hoping for. It's interesting because I feel like when I share these stories, when I'm doing trainings with companies and I share these stories about what it's like to be an American, I feel like that's an aha moment where they develop this empathy. I think it's very important. And I think sometimes, and I make a joke about this, there is a little bit of compassion and wanting to save. Because let me give you a specific example. Americans are receiving training right now and spending tons of money to learn how to give more direct feedback at work because we're so bad at it. Americans are not great at just, just saying, this is what I think. So Americans pay money for this, especially women. We're training women to do this. So I like to joke to Israelis, help us understand, and understand what it's like to sort of be in this system, kind of afraid. And I wonder, I don't know, you brought up a great question. I think there is a moment of wanting to rescue us.
Right now, I'm packing my suitcase and I'm flying to help you. Haley and I have pre-prepared lots of workshops how to deliver straight performance feedback.
Yes.
Our pleasure. But what you say right now is correct. Now I understand why it's empathy with a sense of compassion. That's excellent. So, if someone wants to learn to communicate well in a new culture, where should they begin, in your opinion?
I think the answer sometimes surprises people. I think that the most important thing to do first is actually to learn about your own culture and where your culture stands in the spectrum of behaviors. So I'll give an example. Let's say we're talking about being direct. And we can imagine it as, imagine a line, a spectrum going from super direct on the left side all the way over to completely indirect on the other. It's really important to understand where you stand relative, where you're, because you don't know your own culture. It's like, there's a joke you say to the fish, hey, fish, how's the water? And the fish says, water? Like we have no idea. So the issue there is that when you learn about your own culture, you learn to understand what cues you were expecting. Let me give a specific example. Okay. In English, if you want to ask someone for a meeting or you need to give them some feedback or you need to talk with them in the office, you're going to go up to them and you're going to say this in English. You're going to say, I wanted to know if we could talk. I wanted to know in the past. Now you want to talk to them right now at this minute. You're not talking about last week, but you say, I wanted to know. Many languages don't do that. You don't say it in the past tense necessarily. Here's the funny thing about Americans. When you say to Americans, did you know that you were saying I wanted? They have no idea. Why is this important? It's important because here's a story. We have an Israeli client of mine walks into an office and says, I want to talk to you. The American said to me, came back and said, why is he so impatient? He's impatient and he seems angry at me. And I said, can we actually talk about what he said to you? And I said, the sentence I heard was, I want to talk to you. And I said to her, how would you have said it to somebody? And she said, I would have gone up to the other person and I would have said, I wanted to talk to you. Do you understand how small that sound is? The ED ending, wanted, it's a microsecond. But if you are not aware that you need that tiny little sound,
it's a whole different context.
You will completely interpret it as, oh, this person is just impatient and annoyed. I mean, it's amazing. So the first step is you need to look at what you are expecting. Another quick example is eye contact. There are some cultures where people are not going to smile at you and make eye contact with you when you're speaking to them. I was a teacher trainer for years at universities, and I had American teachers coming to me in tears saying that their Asian students hated them because they sat in front of them and wouldn't smile. Now, again, we can talk about this as a generalization. We can go more into that. But do you see how the first step is you need to know yourself?
So first step is self-awareness.
Yes.
And the example you gave is beautiful because I think the ED hide values and perception.
Yes.
And it's so deep, exactly, Haley, like you said. It's wow. You have to learn to listen to yourself because before you start listening to the other.
Yes. Can I give one other tiny example?
Yeah.
And maybe the listeners can think for a moment. I'm going to give you two sentences, and I want you all to think about, everyone here, what the difference is. Imagine you're at a meeting and you're looking at a particular image that you might want to put on, use for a marketing campaign. You could say, let's say you don't like this image. You don't like it. You could say, this image doesn't work, or this image isn't working. This doesn't work. This isn't working.
For me,
Yeah.
I would say, I think this image doesn't work well.
Okay. Which is, by the way, great, because you said that's another linguistic trick that you need to be aware of as English speakers. You will say, I think. You'll put it back on you.
Yeah.
You'll soften it.
Yeah.
That's great.
So it's like direct, but in a nice way.
Yes.
Not sugarcoat, but nice.
Exactly. And Americans don't know they do this. But let's go back to these two sentences. You can say, this image doesn't work, or this image isn't working. I don't think this is working here. What do you think an American is more likely to say?
I don't know. I think I'll use the phrase "it may not work"
Mm-hmm.
because from what I understand from you is you don't give or you don't put determination. You give assumptions, basic assumptions, suggestions, but you don't make decisions for the other. You let him the place to present or be in the present. I don't know. It's totally different because here it's
Mhm.
me. It's all about me.
Here, what do you say here in Israel?
Yeah.
In
I mean, if people doesn't know till now, we are recording abroad. I'm in Israel, and you and Haley are in California.
That's beautiful analysis. That is exactly what's going on here. In English, we use all sorts of linguistic tricks and tools to make it about us. We don't say your image won't work. We don't say that image doesn't work, because that's pointing a finger at you. What an American would most likely say is, that image isn't working. They don't teach you in English class that is a way of being polite. This isn't working right now. This ing form. And as an American, you need to know that you do that, because when the other person says it doesn't work, your interpretation is, wow, this person is an ass, or this person is impatient, or this person is annoying. So again, it's always about, you need to know what language you were expecting and what your needs were.
Can you demonstrate it using? We spoke before about the 4 dimension of the culture difference.
Yes. So, you had asked before, if you want to learn to communicate in a new culture, where do you begin? So we just talked about self-reflection. Step 2 is, it's really good to have a sense of like the main areas where culture differs. And there's a lot of discussion about this, but to keep it simple for today, we can say there are 4 main areas. The first one is your leadership style. The second one is how direct you are and how you give feedback, which we have discussed. The third one is how much you are allowed to express your emotions. So I can explain quickly by saying, in some cultures, if you're at a meeting, it's really okay to raise your voice and move your hands around and express that you're upset. And many famous stories about Israelis, they have this kind of conversation, then they go out to lunch afterwards. There's a lot of stories of Americans coming to observe meetings in Israel for whatever reason. They were sent over from an American company. They're watching Israelis talk. Maybe the Israelis start fighting. Maybe they switch to Hebrew. I don't know. And the Americans sitting there going, this meeting has gone horribly. Everything is over. This is a fight. And the Israelis are just talking. This is how, this is natural for them. And then one of them turns to the other and says, where are we going for lunch?
And what about the agenda effect?
Oh boy, talk about another 5-hour podcast. Okay. I want to ask you a question. I want to ask what you think.
From my gut's feeling, women are more like to have empathy, and can communicate through culture difference. It's easier
Mm-hmm.
to them.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I can give you my
oh,
opinion.
I'm sitting here, we're rubbing our hands together, looking at each other. Helly and I are in the same room. Go, please, Helly, your thoughts?
I think that Jessica and I have talked about it before. I think that being an Israeli woman, you're probably much more direct than any American woman
Mm-hmm.
and American men. And women in general, when they are direct or assertive, they come across as aggressive. So you have like it's a double sword.
It's a double standard.
Double
A
standard.
double-edged sword.
Double-edged sword,
I think
yeah.
we could say it's a double standard, definitely.
So
Yeah.
I think it's easier to be empathic or understanding or, but you come across as the more direct you are, the more aggressive you seem.
So let me add here. Number one, this is something that's a universal. The way that women are regarded and treated and the expectations upon them are unbelievably universal. It's very interesting. One way to look at this is to say, often women are in a lower position in society. And when you are in a lower position, you must be able to read the cues and the desires of the people in power. So maybe we could say women are more, have more empathy, or maybe we could say women were put in a position where they were forced to have empathy. But by the way, you can say this about any minority. Any minority around has to gain these skills. The other thing I want to say is it's very interesting for Israeli women. Now, I work with lots of women, and some of them are so shy and don't use degree, but in general, yeah, Israeli women have a very delicate tightrope that they need to walk, because on the one hand, they're going to bring their directness to the United States, where they will be confronted with that universal, you're a woman being aggressive? No, thank you. Okay, this is a trend we see all over the world. At the same time that I'm coaching these women, I'm also saying to them, your directness is beautiful. And it's really funny because Americans are paying good money to be more direct like you. So when I work with female clients, I teach them the rules of politeness and diplomacy and all the little linguistic things you can say to not be perceived as, can I say bitch?
Yeah.
Perceived as a bitch, like I wanted to know and I was just checking in to see if we could meet, I teach them that. We write these sentences down and I have them memorize them so that they can play the game if they want to. But they also need to know that, again, this is compassion and empathy. Israeli women help us American women. We need to be more like you. We need to be able to say that idea doesn't work without getting our asses handed to us on a platter for being too aggressive. So you just got me started. Okay.
Well, Heli,
Yes.
your part now.
Okay, so I want to give another perspective, okay? Because I've lived in Israel for almost 40 years, and now I'm here. And some things I meet here that are excellent. Things are really organized. There's an order to things. You know what's expected. And in Israel, it's sometimes so, I don't know, messy, and unorganized.
Lots of surprises.
Lots of surprises, lots of uncertainties. And here you actually know what to expect, and everything has, there's a process. There is a process. I know
everything is by regulation.
Yeah. And in Israel, I worked with managers so hard to, to define a process for working. And it was so hard. People were so against it. And here, when you tell someone we need a methodology, we need a process, it's like you don't need to say it. It's obvious that you need to refine your skills. You need to train yourself to better your skills. There are stages you need to go through to get to something. And I think this is something that made you be the nation you are, that, and a successful nation, because when you have order, people know what's expected of them, and then they can deliver.
Yeah. And those are very big cultural expectations. So, I mean, of course, we can talk a lot about how it's the startup nation, and it has this sense of innovation and taking risks and not being afraid of changing plans. So let's bring this into the workplace, right? We have a beautiful approach from the American side. We have a beautiful approach from the Israeli side. And by the way, when we say American, it's not just like people who've lived in America, their families for 200 years. We have people from all over. We have Asians.
Yes.
We have a lot of people from all different cultures. But yes, so then what sometimes happens, though, the clash happens when you have a person who's used to being more seat of the pants, risk taking, a little less organized, and they confront these expectations. And I do think it's very important for both sides to really understand the cultural logic there.
I think that when it works well,
yeah,
the both sides can really grow.
Yeah.
The messy side can be a bit more organized. The organized can be a bit more messy and risk taking. And this, it can grow to something beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, though, I think it all comes back to the empathy, and I'll even say the compassion, because unless you truly value the other person's side, you could go to 6,000 trainings telling you to change your ways, and you're just going to feel possibly frustrated and overwhelmed and maybe even resentful.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so if having those 4 dimensions, we talked about the leadership style, the directness, emotional expressivity, and we didn't talk about decision making.
We actually just did a little bit accidentally, because when you talk about decision making, it's kind of like, hey, do you make a plan and stick to it, right? This is from Erin Meyer. She's a great theorist in the area of cultural communication. She talks about big D decisions. That's more American, more German, more... Israelis tend to be among those cultures that make what she calls little d decisions, meaning let's make a decision. Yeah, we're going to do that. It's tentative, and we'll change it if we need to.
Yes.
So that's actually...
We'll go with it. We'll start and go with it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually what we were just talking about before.
From my personal experience with the American culture, everything is really in patterns, regulations, and for me, as a creative person, it gives lots of peaceful, calm, security. I don't have to all the time worry. I can be like in a safe place. And it helps me put my energies in the places I wanted to create something. So it's like when I wake up in the morning, I have regular, ongoing morning routine, and usually I don't think while I'm doing it. It's repeatedly routines. It's great. The lack is that if you all the time think only by regulation or patterns or diagrams or scripts, whatever, you might lose your sense of creativity and imagination. So I think it's about balance.
Absolutely.
So if you have a story, go ahead, Jessica. Tell your story, and then we'll.
Yeah. So this is a story I often share when I ask myself, if I just had 1 minute with Americans and I could share one story to tell them something really important to keep in mind when working with Israelis.
Yeah.
This is the story I would tell. And it's not about a workplace, but it's absolutely 100% applicable to a workplace. So here's the first thing I want to say. There will probably be times, if you are an American or a speaker of English or an Asian country, where you will feel like Israelis are annoyed and impatient with you. And to me, this is the number one issue that gets in the way of relationships. And if you don't have a relationship, what's going to happen in the workplace? What's going to happen with you? You have to have a relationship. So I tell this story about a man, an Israeli man who was meeting his future mother-in-law for, let's say, the second time. Maybe not the first time, but the second time. And they were at a party and he wants to, impress her and make nice. And she offers him, this American future mother-in-law, she offers him some ice cream. And he doesn't want any ice cream. So he, as an Israeli, smiles and goes, probably more like this. No, not like that. Cut that out. Yeah, you do it. Go ahead. It's very hard. I need an Israeli to make that sound. Go ahead.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay. Exactly. I didn't do it right. Okay. So he makes that noise to my mother, which really just means, like, I don't want any ice cream. That's cool. And I saw, oh, it's my mother. I was supposed to.
Okay.
It's really okay. It's okay. Look, this is between my husband. I'm not going to lie, folks. This is a story about when my husband met my mother-in-law the second time. So anyway, let's continue. Anyway, so I see the look on my mother's face and she is offended by this noise that he made, right? And the party goes on and I go to her later and I say, Mom, what do you think about this great guy? Isn't he so wonderful? And she's like, yeah. And I said, is there something that happened that you don't like? And she's like, I don't know. He just, and I finally pulled out of her that she felt like maybe he was a little annoyed at her at some point. And I couldn't get her to articulate what it is. There's really a point here for the workplace. When I finally sat down with her and I said, do you remember when you asked him if he wanted ice cream? And she said, yeah. And I said, do you remember what he said when you asked him if he wanted ice cream? Because I had seen this whole thing. And she said, when I asked him if he wanted ice cream, he said no. And I said, did he say no? Like he actually said no, N-O? And she said, yes. And I said, did he sound annoyed? And she said, yes. So what's the point here? The point is actually about how memory works and how relationships are formed. She actually encoded that entire interaction in her head as him saying the word no, N-O, with an annoyed sound, annoyed tone of voice, even though that's actually completely not what happened. So when you think about building relationships, you have to be really, really, really careful to look at the data carefully, hear what people are saying to you, identify if there's a spot that made you feel uncomfortable. And sometimes, by the way, we really can't even trust our memories because that's the nature of the human mind. We encode things in accordance with what we believe and what we know. So to summarize, please, Americans, if you end up working with Israelis, remember, linguistically speaking, their language is different. They're more direct. They say things with fewer words. And every once in a while, they might make a noise that sounds annoyed and they're not. And secondly, remember, it might make you feel a certain way. And that's what you're going to take with you. You're going to take the feeling with you. You have to be really careful about that. I've had a lot of American clients and people say to me, Israelis are brilliant, but why are they annoyed at me all the time? That is literally, it's been said to me a number of times. So please, Americans, keep this in mind.
I think you said many very important things right now. I think Nir and I, we've been talking our whole podcast about differentiating the facts from the
interpretation.
Interpretation, yeah.
Yeah. So we talk about all the time about setting apart the facts from the interpretation. And I think that this is very important to do, to wait a second, reflect what happened, make a difference between what I saw, what I heard, yes, and what I thought about it. And also ask for clarifications.
Yes.
If I think someone is annoyed at me, or I think someone is, sugarcoating and I want to make sure they're with me or, what their specific opinion is, I need to be able to ask and to say it,
Yes. And that shouldn't be just your responsibility. That's very important. I have Israeli clients come to me and they are so overwhelmed by the emotional load of always having to figure out if something is good. Both sides, all sides need to learn this aspect of intercultural communication and feel comfortable getting clarification. They need someone to come in and say that to them, that you're allowed to say, did you mean X or did you feel Y? Without having to be nervous about, like I have clients who are like, I'm so nervous. I want to ask for clarification, but you shouldn't be nervous. I think it's, the company and maybe the manager, everyone's responsibility to help people feel comfortable with this.
Jessica, I really like the point you just cleared because for me, it's a change of point of view, a change of perception, because what you really defined right now is it's all about relationships. And the moment I percept understand that it's not about culture, it's about relationships, I think it's a different point of view. Because in my point of view, relationships is something you work on it.
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I know my wife for almost 30 years, I think even more, and we all the time work together. We try to understand each other, not to change each other. And it's so important because what did happen is that if your mom really want to understand, she should ask. And instead of asking, she made assumptions. And also your husband.
And I want to add to that what I find absolute 100% yes, but I think people need support and coaching to bring themselves to a place where they feel comfortable asking. Number one, my husband had no idea what he did. He was completely, I asked him later, I'm like, did you know you made the noise to my mother? And he goes, huh? Like he had no recollection. And, this is all fine and good to say, but in the real work environment, you're in the middle of your projects, you're in the middle of this, you're thinking about a promotion. It's really hard to get to the place where you're able to, advocate yourself for yourself or defend yourself or to, step back and ask what really happened. It's actually very hard. I think people need help. I think it's asking a lot of people to be able to do this kind of intense emotional work. Because by the way, I just want to say quickly, if you feel insulted or you feel like someone is annoyed with you, that's hard, right? I mean, depending on where you are in your life with your personal development, that might make you doubt yourself. And when you doubt yourself, you're not in a position to objectively explore the situation. I think my mother, she's very, she was once an Israeli for 10 years, came to America. She's extremely sensitive now. And I think her feelings were hurt.
Yeah. And that's a place where you don't think logically.
Exactly. That's exactly
you say things from the heart, not from the brain, and then it escalates the situation.
Yes,
right.
Because it's emotionally involved, and the moment the emotions, the feeling floods you, you don't know what to do. You just act instinctively, not analyzing, not thinking, not making decisions, exactly like you said.
But I do think that once you're in this state where your feelings are hurt, you can take a minute, breathe, take the time, and when you go back to the normal state, you can ask for clarifications.
Yes.
That's the point where when you're working with someone that has a different culture, after you calm down, you're able to reflect and ask yourself, okay, am I totally right? Is my interpretation my automatic interpretation? Was it right on? Or maybe I can ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So you put a question mark on your definitions and on your interpretations. When I can say it in general about relationships, but specifically when you have culture differences.
I have to say two very important things here. Number one, I just have to clarify that my mother really likes my husband now. I just have to say that, okay? But number two.
Well, it's about relationships, right? It's not about culture.
But here's another thing that's important. So you explained it perfectly, Helly. The one thing I want to add in there is that the cultural support and training is super important because, remember the story about the encoding. Like you sit with people and you say, let's sit objectively. Can I ask you to look back and remember what was actually said to you? But here's how the brain works. Your culture tells you that a sound equals badness. And that's all you remember and all you've encoded. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's not always entirely safe to look back at your own memories. But when you have this cultural training, it's easier.
Yeah.
When you have this now.
When you're aware.
Right. If you know about the noise, then you're like, okay, yeah.
I ask you, Jessica, I made a surprise for you. Usually when we are ending our podcast, our chapter, we read a song. And I send you a song in your LinkedIn. Can you please
Okay.
open your LinkedIn? And if it suits you, I'll be happy that you read the song for us. And it's
Okay.
all a surprise. I want all our listeners to know it.
I'm very excited. Okay. Oh, beautiful. Emily Dickinson. What a beautiful poem. Who's going to read it?
You.
Yeah,
Me. I
you're
love
gonna
reading
read it,
books.
and I made it. I didn't made it. I I sent it especially for you.
Wow. There's nothing I love better than reading a poem. I'm helping to translate some poetry right now. I'm so excited. Okay. So we are going to read Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity. It asked a crumb of me. Thank you, Jessica. You're welcome.
Thank you, Jessica.